Right, so today we're going to talk about example 3 in section 5.3. And as you can see, we have an equation. The directions at the top of the note sheet were to solve. So we have to solve for x, figure out what x equals to make this equation true. And when I'm looking at this one and trying to get started, I do see that there's a squared term here. And I have a trig term times another trig term. And so I've got an equation that will require factoring. Whenever you have a power greater than 1, I'll show you if you kind of scroll back up here. Like here, this was a power of 1, sine of x, and negative sine of x. Those are powers of 1, so it didn't require factoring. But when we have something that has a larger power than 1, like this one with the 2, and then the x times x, it does require factoring. So I'm going to solve by factoring. And the first step when we factor is to bring all the terms to one side. So I'm going to bring them to the left and get it to equal 0, and then we'll factor. Remember, when you are factoring, you are dividing out the greatest common factor. And so these are two terms, and it's looking like cotangent of x is our greatest common factor. It's in both of the terms. So I'm going to factor out cotangent of x, and then everything that's left goes in the parentheses. So this is my factored equation. And if you recall when you learned about factoring, either in Algebra 2, Algebra 1, what we do is we take each factor, we set it equal to 0, and we make these little equations that we have to solve now. The benefit of factoring is now these little equations are much more attainable. We can solve them easier than if we just started to work with the original big equation. So these are little mini ones that we can solve. I'll start with the one on the left, and I'm looking at cotangent of x. If I had a calculator with a button of cotangent inverse, I could do cotangent inverse of 0, and I could get my answer. But I don't. On my calculator, I just have sine inverse, cosine inverse, tan inverse. So I'm going to have to look at doing this one by hand. And if you recall, when we talked about inverses and what they are, how to solve them, we're looking for an angle where if you take cotangent of that angle, your answer is 0. So I know that cotangent, the formula for cotangent is x over y. So that means that x over y, when I take my x over y of my the numbers at my angle, I have to get 0. So I'm going to go to my unit circle, and I'm just going to draw a few different points on it. I'm not going to do them all because I don't need them all, but I'm just going to do a few of the points that I have memorized on my unit circle, which are the ones at 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees. So this point on the unit circle at 0 would be over 1 up 0. 90 degrees would be over 0 up 1. 180 is back 1 up 0. And then this one would be over 0 down 1. So all of those ordered pairs are probably going to be what I need because I'm looking at 0. I'm not going to need an ordered pair at like 45 degrees because neither of the terms are 0. So now I'm just going to go and guess and check. So I'm going to take my x coordinate, like I'll look here, my x coordinate divided by my y coordinate, and see if it equals 0. So here my x coordinate is 1 at 0 degrees. My y coordinate is 0. So 1 divided by 0 is undefined. So 0 is not an answer. Then I'll go to 90 degrees. If I take the x divided by the y, 0 divided by 1 is 0. So 90 degrees was a solution. If I go to 180, it ends up being negative 1 divided by 0, which is undefined, so 180 is out. And then if I do 270, 0 divided by negative 1 is 0, so 270 is also a solution. So if I go way back to my pink equation, cotangent of x equals 0, well, my angles would be 90 degrees, and then either 270 or I'm going to write it as negative 90. So I got two solutions with that one. I'm going to go over here and do this other one. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. And then I'm going to get rid of the squared. I'll square root. And the nice thing about cosine is when I do cosine inverse, on both sides, cosine inverse is a button on my calculator. So I can do cosine inverse of square root of 2, cosine inverse of negative square root of 2, and I actually, if you try it on your own, you'll see that you get an error. That means that this equation led us to no more solutions. If you're wondering why it would be an error, here's the deal. If you look at a graph of the cosine of x, the highest that it ever goes is 1, and the lowest that it ever goes is -1. So when you type in cosine inverse, you have to type in a value between 1 and -1 in order to find an angle. If you type in something like square root of 2, that's too high. Negative square root of 2 is too low. So it's out of the range that cosine is in, and so you will not get an answer. So we did get 2 answers on the left here, 90 and -90. Those are the 2 solutions for example 3.